This is Sarah Thibault, and I am the host of the Side Woo podcast. Join me for conversations about mental health and metaphysical issues from the lens of living a more creative, fulfilling, and connected life. From the physical to the metaphysical and beyond, welcome to the Side Woo. Thanks to everyone for coming on end of summer artist talk. Cool. Well, can we give a round of applause to Night Galerie for setting this up? All right. Well, and just to introduce those of you who don't know me or my podcast, I'm the host and creator of the Side Woo podcast, which is a weekly podcast for those who don't know what that is. It's like on-demand radio. You can find it anywhere you stream music. But the Side Woo is my podcast. It's interviews with artists and musicians, creative people about mental health, metaphysical topics, and trying to bring kind of the personal into a conversation that you might have in a space like this that's also about art, but about the behind the scenes of being creative and what it takes to live that life over time. It's hard to be a creative person sustainably. So thank you so much, Iva, for agreeing to be part of this.
Well, thank you guys for coming. And it's so lovely to see like my students from Claremont, my colleagues, my friends, and also strangers. Thank you all for coming.
Yay, strangers. All right. So the first question we always ask on the show is, what sign are you? What astrology sign?
Let's start with a guessing game. I'm a Gemini. And, you can deploy that to excuse all sorts of bad behavior, but also really great behavior.
Like what?
Well, it actually has come to kind of help me understand why is it at some moments, that could be like months at a time, I need to be completely alone and everything irritates me and I'm alone with the paintings, and then I pop out of that mode and I want to have community and invite dancers and collaborate with musicians and set up circuses and, and I realized, I was like, what is that? What is that? As a picture. And I was all of a sudden popped into my head, like the Napoleon Dynamite movie and the liger. I was like, I'm a liger. That's what it is.
Oh, remind everybody what that is. A lion.
A liger is if you take a lion and a tiger and they have a baby, they produce this incredibly neurotic creature, because one moment it wants to be alone, one moment it wants to be social, because one moment it's, what is that called?
It's like a lion and a tiger, and tigers are introverts or something?
Well, tigers are just alone.
Okay.
They're just alone, and lions,
are not.
No. They're
royalty.
Yeah. Well, they have what is that called? A lion. Yes, thank you. See, that's like where language, I'm like, tuna fish.
I love
that.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that is reflected in your work too, in this push and pull between this like really interior dialogue that kind of comes out in this materials and feels like a very personal conversation that you can, as a viewer, unpack it in your own way and appreciate it for what it is, but like feels like there is like a secret language that you've developed for yourself, and then you have these performances which inherently require other people to be a part of them. So it's interesting to hear you talk about yourself that way, because I feel like your work does have kind of these two sides of.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I feel like everything has kind of two sides,
Or many more than that.
Well, for the purposes of practicality, we assume it's two sides, but the two sides of the moon, I mean, whoever stopped to think about it, that's absurd.
It's
thought,
round,
right?
There are no sides.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, we could go on and on and on and on about that, but the point is conversations around painting, often people are like, are you an abstract painter? Are you a figurative painter? I'm like, I'm both. And then lately I've been thinking much more about Well, maybe it's about the concrete and the abstract. And maybe it's about, material context. Like, yesterday I was talking to a friend and he was using this phrase, the root of something. And I was like, well, we all say things, but then if you just keep thinking about it, it gets more and more complicated, because think about it. It's like, okay, there's the root, but then at every moment of the root, there's the context of whatever that sediment, that layer of dirt, I feel like
the fertile ground for things to kind of emerge
but
out of.
But also the complicated ground, sometimes it's not that fertile. Sometimes it's kind of clay or sticky or, full of whatever toxic detritus, human beings left in that layer. I always think of, COVID. It's like baby blue in terms of the landfill, the landfill.
Oh, because of all the masks.
Yes,
and,
yeah. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is
well, but I like that, not to interrupt you, but I like that distinction, because I think as painters, we're constantly having to explain to people what you do in a way that maybe the people who don't know art might have heard about, abstract, landscape, figuration, flowers. But I would say the majority of painters now are working in this in-between space, and you certainly are. It almost is what part of the painting do you want to talk about, in terms of.
But I think that's true of any time. I was just in Spain on an art pilgrimage, and one moment I was facing 80,000-year-old markings on the rock, and the guide was going on and on.
Oh, no.
Well, the tour guide, because they only let 5 people inside of the cave. He was going on and on in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but I knew exactly what he was talking about. He was talking about it's a ritual, it's a possession, it's this and this, and I'm it's not it's
being a cave painter.
None of it. What it is touch, and this mysterious, because when you're there, you realize oh, it wasn't some artist comes in and it's oh, I'm gonna paint a deer and have a ritual about it. Everything is alive and moving and water, and it's this relationship to this dome of earth and to being inside of this earth that is in motion, because rock is in motion when you're inside of a cave. And then you notice oh, what you perceive as a contour is not a contour. It was not made by a human hand. It's just the rock painting itself. And then there's a little bit some, weirdo like me. It's woo, there's, you put a tail and then it's galloping, right? And I feel there's a lot in these paintings actually that has to do, what is that minimal, for all the labor involved. I've been trying over the years, over 30 years of painting, to kind of do less, to let the material speak, to let the material record both itself and the conditions, in the studio, whether it's the floor, the water, the things seeping through, layers and layers of canvas that are stacked on the floor, my dog's dog hair. That's redundant. My dog's dog hair. Anyways, but this okay, how do you get kind of out of the way, in a sense, in the process, so you let the world in a way become more present? I feel we're always kind of obscuring the world, and it's all there. Right.
Well, and thinking about, I feel you're speaking to the process and the end product, but one of the things that was the inspiration for this show is from your Bulgarian roots, called Kukeri. Mm-hmm. I was afraid I was going to mispronounce that. But for those who don't know what they are, they're these Bulgarian folk spirits that when they do costumes in a parade in Bulgaria look like Nick Cave sound suits. There's amazing, tall, furry creatures.
Yeah.
And so, so what you told me about them seems really relevant to what you're talking about, this, concrete, but then like obliteration of the concrete through that vehicle of like the spirit. I don't know if you can talk about that. Like they're basically agents of destruction.
Yeah, well, they're complicated because, so first of all, like, you know, it's a pagan tradition. Bulgarians are not very good at, like, you know, adhering to any. I mean, the Balkans are just a very complicated environment. You know, dominated, colonized. You know, everybody's always like, okay, who's in charge and who do I become in the meantime so I can survive? You know, that's kind of the attitude. Like, there's a story of, like, you know, a woman, you know, who literally changed her, like, her response to the question of who are you, you know, like 4 times in the course of a day. And like, well, you know, you could be.
That's like a folk tale, or?
No, it's like real tale in like the post-war period.
Yeah.
The thing is, Kukeri goes back to the Thracian times, to the time of, you know, Orpheus and you know, like reverie. And what I love about Kukeri, and I've been painting about this, you know, for many, many years, is the fact that they kind of descend upon the villages in these like cacophonous groups, and it's cowbells and furs, but each village has its own version. So, and each family has its own interpretation and version of it. But the point of the Kukeri is that through chaos. So this happens in February, you know, when the earth is frozen but bubbling with energy, is that these guys come and through their reverie, this cacophonous explosion of, you know, sounds mixed with texture, mixed with like the blurring of the lines between the animal and the human and the divine and the pedestrian, you know, it brings about rebirth. So it's like you clear away the evil spirits and then things are, you know, capable of growing again. And there's something about that upside downness. So I am like, you know, if somebody was like, what's your spirituality? I'm like, Pippi Longstocking, Kukeri.
Wait, why Pippi?
Well, you know, she had no parents, which is, I mean, kind of. She made all sorts of shit up about, you know, who she was. She was not... you know, she had huge shoes.
I don't remember that about her, that she was kind of like a liar.
Oh, she was a great liar.
Storyteller.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah, well,
it's been a while since I've read that series. But I was a fan, of course, like with the
I walked
braids.
around. I spent a lot of time walking around. I even like tied like a little monkey to the strap of my dress, and I put wire in my hair. So. And I just like tromped around the woods outside of Sofia in my imagination. But back to it's the upside downness. It's the irreverence. It's the lying. It's the giant shoes. It's the horse that lives inside of the kitchen. It's like anything that is, you know, inside out allows a kind of like perspective, you know. And I feel like painting or the studio, or I think like all of us who practice this weird act, which is completely impractical and often very painful, are kind of addicted to that openness, to the unknown, and to the, you know, kind of allowing for that kind of adult play, you know.
When I think too, when you like flip the script or like destroy, you know, you're kind of destroying an illusion, you know, and you become more aware because the fact that you can destroy something and it can still be there and change shape and morph, it's proving that nothing's really gone away. It's just shape shifting. And I feel like your work really does that. It's like the cutting and the tearing and the layering is like breaking the illusion of like the picture plane as this window, but at the same time communicating its own version of that. Like it's a portal, not a window almost.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people have used that word portal.
Oh, interesting.
To describe the paintings, and I think to different people that means different things. I mean, I'll be curious, you know.
What do people think?
Yeah,
no?
what people
we'll
think.
Ask later, yeah.
But it's interesting because like now I feel like more I've heard that word, but I don't know. Early 2000s, I don't think portal was like a word. the people. I mean, it's like sounds funny, but
It's-
now everybody's
that
like
just speaks
opening
to where we're
portals and
at.
stuff.
Everyone's
Yeah.
metaphysically minded now.
Well, because like we're like really running out of freaking time.
We're like, where's the portal that I can go to?
Well,
to
no,
leave?
it's serious. And I mean, I saw the most beautiful like thing on Instagram today, but it was Jane Goodall, and she was asked like, you're 90, what's next? And she's like, dying, and like, I mean, I just like, it was like, I don't know, I made my whole day seem like, besides the new dog, like seem kind of like open. It opened up. And something, something about that, like that adventurousness and like those bright eyes of that woman who's I've worshipped since I was a child. Again, like, gosh, like
It's like a fearlessness.
Well,
or,
but how many things that she has single-handedly allowed us to see for what they are, which is like, animals, love, all of the ways in which like, a lot of the, speaking about flipping the narrative, like more and more kind of like, well, and I have conversations like all over the place where it's a grocery store and a studio, like, oh, have you heard about owls? Owls do math. It's like all of these things, these distinctions, both science and our own hearts are catching up to the fact that we have lived with a kind of, brutal and brutalizing narrative that is the cause of so much suffering, whether human, animal, environmental, and it's time to really kind of flip it. So yeah, Pippi Longstocking, Kukeri, whoever can help us out.
And birds are amazing because they see way more colors than we do. Like they're like cones and rods are like double what we have, and so they're seeing like in just the gray floor they'd be like tripping out on everything, But like on the note of the owl doing math, that's partly as a way for them to sense their surroundings, right? It's like a synesthesia almost.
I mean, they're
they're
synesthetic beings because basically the reason they have to do math is because a lot of their audio input gets processed in the visual cortex, and then they use like
birds.
Like a very
Crazy.
complicated statistical mathematics that I would not even understand how to even think
Nobody
about
here
it.
would. It's okay.
Right,
Yeah.
that's right. But is a way for them to map the probability, to spatially map and temporally map the probability of where a prey will go, in a space.
Yeah, and I think like
so
the
it's
reason this
fascinating.
like came up in the recent interview you did is like you're kind of doing that with your painterly language and then the way you're using materials and just like I guess I feel like all artists are like have some form of synesthesia. That's like literally what we're doing. We're translating some sensory input into something else. So for you, like I mean, Kukeri are in here, seascapes, landscapes, but like what do you feel like, if anything, like while you're making that you're translating into like color, form, like what is it that's like going through the filter for you?
I would say it's more this practice of one, creating the conditions where there's many things happening all at the same time in different orientations in terms of like the orientation of my body. So things are on the wall, on the floor, I'm walking on them or sitting on them, squatting on them, I'm pointing at them. And then all these different materials, and some of them are stacked. And I love stacks because stacks both reveal and conceal. And this is like a big theme when it comes to the seascapes and landscapes. I mean the snowscapes and seascapes, which is like, basically like, okay, it's a surface that both reveals and conceals, right? So it's like this practice of like the legible and the illegible, the, in the moment action, right? So like the history of action painting and the kind of like archaeological, very slowly revealing like a fragment, and you don't know if you're gonna find like, a tooth or, you know.
Well, which is funny
a
because
shark.
I walked into your show and was like excavation, which is like a famous painting by de Kooning, you know, like that was the first thing that hit. And it's really for his painting, like a psychological excavation, really. I mean, for your work too, but
Yeah,
there's
absolutely, because there's no
more
like,
moments of-
yeah, I mean, I think what happens, like the paintings become this like membrane that's why I call them recordings. They like kind of record both, it's like that interface between the world and whatever, like this interior, exterior that's not bound, right? You know, what is being projected, imagined, sensed, it's all just in that moment incredibly undulating for me. And it's this practice of, I call it like kind of radical freedom, where, and it's scary, but it's because you can't judge it in the moment. You can't be like, oh, let me make this better. No, you're like, you're just like vibing in that moment and allowing things to accumulate. But then, you know, how the gauze captures my scratches or my, you know, or how the muslin or how the canvas resists, or how, you know, some of them started on the floor and then were stretched. Some of you guys came to the performance, which was, you know, I installed also all the unstretched free paintings who are, you know, meant for the outdoors. They like to be outdoors. I think all paintings like to be outdoors. I think we all like to be outdoors.
Yeah, everybody. I think we should do more outdoor shows, just like find trees and like put our paintings on them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, you know, anyways, my point is going back to that process is that practice of radical freedom. It's very challenging, and often it's, you know, it's almost like after the fact, I'm like, oh, I was there. I don't know where I was, but I was there. And then I go outside with my dog and kind of sit there stupefied in this like, I call it like the extra alive mode, where your senses are so finely tuned that you're hearing way too much and you're sensing way too much, and yeah, and it's rad.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing. Let's all get there. I feel like what you're talking about, this kind of being and existing in multiple spaces, like I'm kind of going through this, like, been talked about a lot on the podcast, like gender identity shift, like, and I feel like the only thing holding me back at this point is language, like to be able to describe what I'm experiencing. And I feel like with painting and art can tell us a lot about our world, and I think one of the things that abstract painting does, or not to use that word too lightly, but is exist outside of language. Like it gives you an outlet to express things that you can't necessarily put into word, like this ebbing and flowing. And I feel like how does that show up for you in other parts of your life? Because I feel like, you know, our art kind of takes us along on a journey that seeps in and out of like our creative life and into our personal life, or.
I mean, I don't know. I really
Gemini brain. It's just everywhere.
No, you know, honestly, I feel like maybe like let's say like 6-7 years ago, I was much more articulate, or much more sort of convinced that I knew something or other, you know, or at least like if somebody was like, oh, tell me about, you know, your relationship to Picasso, I'd be like, blah, 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 you know, and nowadays it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, like I just saw Guernica for the first time. I have painted in response to that painting I feel like for my entire life, you know? And yet I just saw her. And I saw her, and I sat there in the Prado, and I looked, and then I walked away, and then I came back, and there were all these people taking selfies, and I was like, what are they seeing? And then I was like, who cares? And then I just sat there and I looked and I looked. And it was like looking at the ocean. I had zero like consciously speaking or linguistically speaking. All I know is I was so present. I seemed to have like left my body, and at the same time I was so present I was entirely in my body. And so that painting was big and it was small, and it kept pulsing, and it was black and it was white, and it was graphic and it was abstract, and and then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, it's that screaming gargoyle I saw in Barcelona as I was like walking, and there was people everywhere, and people selling fans, and people eating ice cream, and there were tourists and immigrants and people from North Africa and Pakistan and Los Angeles and who knows where, and I'm sure there were some Bulgarians in there too, but I saw this screaming gargoyle, all weathered, still screaming in the top of this building, and I was like, I'm sure Picasso saw it because he was in the Gothic Quarter. And I was like, it's all in the world. It's like none of us invent anything. It just some of us like are present enough in these moments to like notice. And it's so there.
Yeah. Oh,
Sorry.
it's beautiful.
I love that gargoyle.
We'll be posting an image maybe on Instagram when we share this episode. So, well, thinking about Picasso, you know, like I remember Jerry Saltz like 10 years ago or something writing about Picasso versus Matisse's use of black, and that's something I noticed about your work is you use a lot of just like black. Like as a painter, I was taught you're not supposed to use black. You're supposed to mix your own and have it be all different shades, like purple and blue and red, you know, like alizarin crimson and stuff. But like you use just straight up black. And I feel like that's what, you know, Picasso did it and Guernica and other paintings. And so did Matisse. But I feel like with you and Picasso, it's more about a mark and I don't want to say act of violence. Like I don't want to rope you in with, you know, my issues with Picasso, but whereas I feel like Matisse uses black in a way that it's like accenting like a stained glass window. But for you, it's like black has like real weight to it. And so maybe you can speak to just your color choices, but also like, yeah.
Well, I think it's funny because I think the truth is that like I never actually took a painting class. So I never learned how to paint properly. No, I'm exaggerating, but you know, I feel like my kind of relationship to black really comes through drawing and graphite and charcoal, and it just, of course I've taken painting classes. I taught painting for 20 years. Like, I get it. I get what your teachers were saying, but there is a kind of, you know, the immediacy of like black ink, you know, black gesso, black paint, like it just, it's...
Well, like, not to keep referencing the de Koonings, but like Elaine de Kooning said it was like salt, you know, which it's interesting you have like Seascapes here with a lot of black in them. But I like that idea that there's something like cool or like, yeah, like salty that kind of like grounds a piece in a way that like a mixed black maybe wouldn't, or something that was slightly warmer, you know, like your blacks are very cool.
Well, black is
kind of
such an interesting,
neutral.
Yeah, such an interesting color because it kind of like, again, back to the Kukeri in the earlier conversation, it's like it kind of flips things. You know, it's like, well, is black a color? Well, of course it is, right? Is black a void? Well, yes and no. And is black cool or warm? Is black, I mean, I love, like, there was this quote, I'm totally going to misquote it, but it's like stuck in my head, like Gertrude Stein talking about, again, you know, Picasso in Spain, and basically she was like, yeah, there's no color in Spain, it's just like black and silver, you know, and The other thing that, for me, black, there's art history, like Backman, Max.
Oh, Max Beckman.
Sorry.
We're
God, like
here
my
with you.
Dyslexia. Max Beckman. There's, the Klein, but also Chinese ink painting and.
Well, like you said, like charcoal, which is like the result of burning.
Right, or like one of my favorite painters is painters is James Castle. It's soot and spit. Like black has all of these kind of art historical references, but when I think about kind of like, again mixing that personal in when I was growing up in Bulgaria, there was this thing called necrolog. And it's you spent a lot of time as a child back in the 80s and 70s in Bulgaria just standing there. And it's like always waiting for something. You're waiting for your grandma to buy bread, and that takes hours. You wait for the bus, and that takes hours. So there's a lot of standing around and being clutched by a grandmother. So you're like, you're stuck in that clutch. And so the only entertainment that left to you is to like look around. So bus stops were the favorite place where people placed these necrologs, which were photographs of the recently deceased with their age, and this like little black border. And people who also, bus stops were also full of like other people, and everybody always has somebody who's just passed. But in Bulgaria, the mourning is like ongoing. So people have this like black ribbon that's attached to their, collar. And I was so, there was just something about the photographs of these humans and then the number underneath them, and then these like black ribbons. And then I grew up in Sofia. I was truly, people are like, oh, you must know so much about Bulgarian folklore and like how much you're Bulgarian. And I'm like, I don't know anything. I grew up in Sofia. I was truly a product of, the socialist dream. Like I studied Esperanto. I listened to Michael Jackson. I don't think that was part of it, but anyways, the point is like the village, the folklore, Bulgarian traditions, those were whispers. Like only later in life did I find out my great grandmother was an immigrant from Macedonia who, fled in 1918 with her baby across the mountains. So it's like, multiple generations of immigrants. She was a medicine woman and a shaman, and tended to women and solved all sorts of things with herbs. But my grandmother was a dentist, my mother was a pediatrician. But then a lot of these bizarre remedies, such as if you sprain your ankle, what you do is you make toast, you put vinegar on it, and you put it on your swollen ankle. Whoa. And you wrap it with some sarai wrap.
Amazing.
And you go to sleep, and in the morning, the toast has absorbed all of that liquid.
You don't say.
Oh, I do say.
Have you tried it?
Oh, yeah.
And it works?
Oh my gosh, I have cured all sorts of human beings.
With vinegar on toast?
And toast, yes.
Oh my God, everyone, report back, please.
Which is also part of my painting technique, But
vinegar on toast.
But the point is like, this way in which like but when you go to the Bulgarian villages, which were emptied during my childhood of all the young people and all the middle-aged people and all the other people who are not the elderly, it was just these beautiful landscapes, these crumbling houses, and these women in all black. Mm-hmm. And so black for me is this like, I don't know, mystery, this opening, even as a child, to something I didn't understand. Mm. But it was palpable, intense, strangely comforting, but mysterious. And so I think black for me, and I shared with you that I had like this kind of vision of, like these black paintings and the
Oh yeah,
tapestry.
we were talking earlier a couple weeks ago, and she told me she had this vision. This was right after I said like a couple painters, like the last body of work they ever made were like all black paintings, and then it didn't go so well after that. And she's like, well, it's funny you should mention that. So yeah, sorry to interrupt, just for context.
Well, anyway, so I'll finish answering this question, and then perhaps if you have another question, or if you guys have some questions, because I'm sure it's time is flying. But and I'm gonna put my son on the spot. But when he was little, he loved to paint with black ink, and sometimes like as a parent, you're just like a shithead, and you're like, well, I want the other things, I want, like the other, like parents have these like kind of colorful drawings on their fridge. I wanted one of those to prove that I was a good parent.
Funny.
So I was like trying to like encourage like the use of watercolors, and I was like, well, what about these
To
colors?
go with the couch.
And then he looks at me. He was 3. He looks at me. He's like, black is complicated, and continued to work with.
Amazing.
With the black ink, and anyways, black crows. Yeah, black is wonderful.
Well, I did want to ask about your performances a little more. Like how did you get into doing these like, performance dance curations, and like what your background might have been to like bring that into your painting practice?
Well, I think that what we make, and I'm sure people in the room relate to what I'm saying, is like the art, the work is always smarter than us. It's like, yeah. I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, those guys were like, come on, let's do it. Come on, you can do it.
Those guys meaning the paintings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on. And, it's like I was making sculptures, and then I was running into the sculptures, and, the sculptures look like, like I kept thinking about like, okay, Pilates tables, like the Inquisition. I spent a lot of time like being...
Totally. Wait, let's just pause for that juxtaposition. Someone in the audience is cracking up. Totally. So it's not, I occasionally like get a hit on people's past lives. I feel like you've had a past life in Spain, like during that time, like, I don't know. Have you ever done any work around that?
I have never done any kind of work that would be helpful, maybe.
Or just like you've never gotten a reading where someone's like, oh, your past life was...
No. For some reason, I'm like afraid of like tarot card readers, and like...
Boo.
I was
very
at a party.
scary.
I was at a party, and they were like, "There's a card day." I'm like, "No."
I've got a mini deck in my purse, actually. If we want to really scare you,
I'm totally for it. It's just, I feel like, I don't know. I'm already so open to, in my paintings are that practice of radical openness that it's almost like, when people are like, it's like I have to be so sober and so well slept, and consume salad and like oatmeal, because like I'm already so unhinged.
That's the Gemini.
Yeah, that that feels like opening up to even more that I cannot possibly handle.
I see. Yeah.
But there are moments of these kinds of like, it's what compelled me to go to Spain? It wasn't like, I'm gonna go vacation in Spain. It was like a pilgrimage. I had to go. These paintings told me I had to go. I did it on my credit card. Like it was, it was like, and my son came along with me, and we traveled through many different spaces and times, and we made it to northern Spain, and I was there. Never occurred to me you have to make a reservation to see the prehistoric paintings. But I was like, no, it's not possible. I'm here. I have to see these things, and I have to witness them, because there's something that drew me to this place and to this encounter. So. And then it happened.
They let you in.
They let me in. The website let me in. Like as I was standing there melting down in the middle of like nowhere, all of a sudden like a spot opened up. miraculously.
Mysterious,
So
yeah.
so ghost stories, divination through the internet, the cultural contambria, whatever. Yeah. Anyways, but back to
Back to your performance though,
the
and your
performance.
work knowing more than you.
The performance, I would say, has many roots. I mean, I worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art with Susan Rosenberg, who wrote the most incredible book about Trisha Brown and in relationship to art. Rauschenberg's collaborations with, Merce Cunningham. Capro's happenings, Dada performances, this incredible documentary that I saw in Humboldt County called, what was it called, man? Anyways, it was about like this time in the 20s in Europe where, like these kind of radical experiments around the body, around, breaking down the barriers between costume, medium, nature, culture, war. I mean, all of this sort of and it always felt like the place where I wanted to take the paintings and allow them to have these encounters, the paintings themselves have these encounters with sound, with another body other than my own, as a way to, again, make that process of the making and then make the process of the looking intertwine more and more and more and more. So the performance is part of actively learning, unlearning various habits I have around okay, what's the difference between a recording and a composition? What is the difference between a happening and an exhibition? What is the difference between literally allowing for the bodies of the audience to be as essential as the making body, so the looking body and the making body.
Well, and for those who weren't here, it was really amazing because all these kids started engaging with the pieces, and one little guy in a Spider-Man costume, especially, which was so it was from another time, anachronistic to see a kid in a Spider-Man Halloween costume, essentially running through these paintings that look like they're from potentially prehistoric time, but it was an interesting fusion and brought things up around scale and just how do you bring this language into the present moment. Well, does anyone have any questions? I can bring the mic to you.
Thank you. I find your compositions immensely absorbing and interesting, and I want to ask about one small thing that helps make them interesting to me is, of all the stuff that you could attach to the surface of a canvas, you attach canvas. So I want to know, I have two questions. Are you hiding something? Or is one canvas not enough? You're doubling, in effect, the painting surface. What is behind that?
Wow, that's a great question. Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, there's nuances to answering it because yes, you're right. It's canvas to canvas. It's it's not it's the thing and the thing. There's doubling up. It's the doubling up and how do you intensify it? How do you make it more present, even more present? And the hiding part is interesting because I remember seeing this interview with Mark Corelli, and he's very I wish I was that confident, man. But he was so confidently talking about the process, and it's well, if you don't like it, you just glue something on top of it, right? And I was oh yeah, that's a good idea. But when I glue something, what I glue is, it's always semi-transparent. The gauze is, it's an erasure that's fails. It's, the muslin that I used to glue or paint on the one hand, it's very excited about receiving paint, but it bleeds on both sides. So it's controlled and direct, and at the same time a little bit like out of control. And then the act of gluing is a whole other thing, because a lot of these new paintings in this room, they were made with gauze that, like, the moment you put some medium on it, it starts to flop out of control. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna let it move. So these cords that move around, I'm drawing with them, then they become pathways, then they become like, so it's both like, yeah, again, like concealing and revealing, it's like, is it pushing back something and hiding something? Is it a cocoon? Is it like the cocoon sort of unraveling itself? And I think in that process, like what becomes first, second, third, it just becomes irrelevant, but it's something about that surface continuously producing itself. And I think that was what was so revelatory to me to be in the caves in Cantabria, was that fluidity, that waterness of the earth. And to kind of understand that, interesting, I grew up like, in art history classes, like, Gothic architecture is about the celestial and blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, it's about the cave. Like, these domed, like, womb-like spaces. And I feel like, again, like the concealed, the revealed, it's that tension. And like bringing same with same is really kind of interesting. So I got to think more about your question, because it's totally fascinating.
Do we have any other? Oh yeah, thanks. Thank you so much. Anybody else might have to come up.
Do you dance with your paintings? How physical are you when you make these? Because they really have this like really vibe of like you being super active, and I kind of pictured, the performances kind of coming from your actual practice of making them, actually.
Well, that's a good question. I spent pretty much like my adult life being in excruciating chronic pain, starting in 2003. When I was living in New Orleans, this pain just kind of came and it didn't leave. And at one point, I lost the ability to kind of walk, and I couldn't move, I couldn't paint. Anyway, so what's funny is like, most of the time, like I'm doing some weird like physical therapy on the floor, and I always feel like I'm just like very gently trying to move around. And only recently, I would say in the past 2-3 years, am I kind of pain-free and able to actually move. But it's always with a bit of like, I even, like with a little caution, like, if I move a little too fast, like, something will happen. So there is very little like, and yet I again, like, I come back to the studio the next day, I'm like, wait, who made this? Because like, there's a lot of like jumping around took place to, make all these paintings. I mean, I made that painting literally like 2 days.
Wow.
But it's like when I'm compelled, I'm like the butler to the paintings, like I feel nothing, right? But it's, it's not, it's weird because it's contradictory again. It's like, there's a lot of motion and there's a lot of stillness, and there's a lot of stillness and a lot of motion.
Yeah, it's like you're channeling. And so do you feel like you leave your body, or you're there? You just...
No, I think like more and more it's that practice of being in my body, which is, so I think that to go back to your question, I think that the layering, the surface, the allowing for the image and the surface are co-producing themselves. And it's in that co-production, I feel like I'm free to actually not do anything. So I can both be, super active and really quiet, and I can, so it's this constant like shifting a rhythm. So that's just like my interest in my collaboration with my husband Matt when it comes to the sound and the performances is, on the one hand, I don't really even like music or sounds, but at the same time, like my paintings are supersonic, and I think of them in terms of sound. So it's weird. It's like there's no sound. Maybe I'm an owl. I don't know. But the paintings are like music, but they're not about music. So there's no like translation. They just act in that way.
Love it. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Would you mind coming around just so we can get? No, it'd be for the podcast. Sorry.
Eva, I just wanted to ask, in light of everything you've been saying, what happens when the paintings come into an exhibition space, in an exhibition condition? Because on the surface, it would seem to be almost like anathema to the spirit of the making and of the process. But I'm sure it's not as simple as that.
That's a great question. So I've been thinking a lot about like, okay, maybe the reason why we're so wretched is that we all have to endure so many layers of contradiction in our day-to-day, in our like lives, in our, spaces, and it's like, who loves a highway? Nobody. Well, sometimes it's kind of fun,
Wait, who said that?
I do.
Oh. I love highway too.
Well, the way that like it swirls and like does these things, and then you can die on it. Anyways, like,
Oh my God.
but an exhibition is truly a contradiction, and it used to be super fun. I don't know what happened. It used to be like, I can't wait to have an exhibition. I can't wait. And now I'm like, I have to go to Spain and look at cave art and Guernica and like, never come back again. So it's again back to the Liger, which is a great way to end this wonderful, fun time of talking to you guys who have been so patient and kind. But it's again like there's the exhibition, and I am so grateful to Night Gallery. Don't get me wrong. Like it's the paintings really like walls, and they really like to be seen. And so I'm so grateful to have a chance to get them out of my studio where they're just like stacks. They're just stacks, and if they linger long enough, I paint over them, quickly and unapologetically. But there is like that contradiction of like, where's the exhibition and where's so the performance. So when I was preparing for the performance in Night Gallery again, they were so generous in letting me kind of do something that was just in my head. And I have notes in my sketchbook, like 3 years ago, I was like, and then in courtyard of Night Gallery, like they probably didn't even know who I was back then, but I was like, and then the paintings would just be outside, And so as with the team at night, like, we suspended the guys, but then, it was like, I don't know, 10 paintings, 15 paintings, I have no idea. But anyways, with all these unstretched paintings, and it was 95 degrees, and the pollution, and I was so dirty, and I was so happy because, like, I was just sitting there watching these things like flop in the wind for 3 days straight because there was like other things I had to do. And what was interesting was noticing, okay, so there's the light and the wind conditions at like noon, and then at 1, and then around between 3 and 4, man, that wind is like, so the paintings were flopping in all directions, and they just seemed like so alive. And, there was something about the paintings outside, and I've taken the paintings, to Elysian Park. I even went up to the top of Echo Mountain, and I want to take them to like Malibu Creek, and I want to like, drop them in the, some water. The thing about the paintings is they're resilient. They're like our bodies, on the one hand, so fragile, and at the same time, so resilient. And there's something in that, like, intensity of the both fragility and resilience, that kind of humanness, it's not metaphorical, but concrete for me, as embodied by the paintings. And so, yeah, like the performance is like almost like, the other side of the more formal exhibition. And they're polarities, they're flip sides, back to the moon, they're, so it's something that I am really, curious about. Like, what does all that mean, Anyways.
I love that. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, everybody, to come out.
Thank you.
Thank you to Iva. Yay. All right. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks again. Yeah. That's all for this week's episode. Thanks for side wooing with us. We release episodes every other week on Thursday. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please rate, follow, subscribe, and review our podcast for good karma points. Until we meet again in the side woo.